Dobo, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, thank you.
Glad to have you here. So, for those of you who don't know you, who is Dobo and what has your data journey been like so far?
All right. My name is Dobo Radichkov. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Holland and Barrett. My journey with data probably started a while ago. I grew up in Bulgaria. Growing up, I was a maths geek.
Okay.
And when I was 18, I moved to the US and I studied computer engineering. And I wanted to get into the space where I could use some of that engineering geekiness that I had, but also work with difficult or challenging business problems. So when I graduated, I joined a analytics company, analytics consultancy called Canada Associates, which was later acquired by Kantar Retail, part of WPP. And for the first few years, that was an amazing opportunity because we worked with large quantities of data way before we had big data and cloud and AI and all of that stuff. We had big machines, servers in the basement. We were running, complicated queries on hundreds of millions of data points and loyalty card data from large CPG retailers and manufacturers in the US. And it was exciting, right? Because it took 20 minutes to run a query. And so you had to make sure you actually write a pretty good query, and then you can go off and play a game of chess, and then you come back and look at the results, right? It's not
like this whole punch card computing.
Well, not quite like that. So this was 2004, right? So relatively still modern times, but before cloud was there. And so you today we're spoiled, right? You can run queries in seconds, you can get the insights instantly, and you can just go really, really fast. But that's when I really, really got excited about data, analytics in general, and kind of bringing that technical, geeky side, the scientific part of it, the engineering, with the application of that to solve, difficult business problems. Because in the end of the day, we were consultancy, so we were consulting, putting together, presentations and recommendations and proposals, and using the insights from the data to help our clients. So that kind of set the direction of my, professional journey. I did that for 5 years in the US. I moved back to the UK in 2009. I completed a master's in business. And then I did consulting for a few more years. And then I decided I've done enough consulting for a lifetime. Right. And I moved into like a pure tech role, right? So I joined a company called OLX, which is a global classifieds operator. So for those of us that may not be familiar, similar to eBay or Craigslist in the US or Gumtree here.
Or Dubizzle.
In Dubai, And so, the scale of that business was just mind-boggling, right? At the peak, we had 500 million monthly active users and operating in markets like Brazil, India, large Southeast Asia markets, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, right? So it was just really, really exciting. And this was in 2014, right? Again, it was relatively early in the cloud journey. A lot of companies were still on-premise and were coming on the cloud. And for the next 7-8 years, that was a journey for me. And that's when my journey with AWS also started, right? So we built all of the central kind of data infrastructure and architecture and platforming on AWS. And I'm sure we'll chat about that in a bit more detail later. But that was super exciting. So I had an opportunity to work with really fantastic teams, very, very talented, building that stuff. And then about 3 years ago, I moved to the UK, returned to the UK again. And I've been with Holland and Barrett since late 2021, where I look after the data team, the central data and analytics organization. And that's the end-to-end sort of spectrum from data engineering, the very technical stuff, to data warehousing, analytics, data science, and BI. And it's been super exciting. We're part of a big digital transformation. The data topic is very important and a big part of the strategy of the HMB digital transformation journey. And 3 years later, we're still here and growing that team and stronger than ever, and very close partners with AWS as well.
Very interesting journey.
Yeah.
I definitely want to drill down more on
Yeah.
the transformation you're having in H&B.
Yeah.
But before that, I mean, this has been what, 20-year journey or so?
Yeah, about 20 years now, yeah.
So I think you mentioned some very important things that demystify a little bit the journey towards becoming a chief data officer.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people these days are aspiring to understand, how can I break into data analytics? How do I become an ML engineer? How do I get into this world? And a lot of it is, of course, making the right moves at the right time, and depending on your skills and the available technology.
Yeah.
What advice in terms of making the right moves would you give to a young, aspiring, ambitious go-getter now? Would you recommend consultancy first as a foundation? Would it be taking a software engineering role? Would it be straight into data engineering? What would you recommend?
Honestly, I don't think there's one path. I think it's more the end goal that is important, right? So you kind of want to be, and again, my journey is very personal, very individual, but there's probably many different ways to get to the role. Data itself is very diverse, right? So within my area, my team deals with extremely technical, engineering-heavy topics. And then we deal also with parts of the team deals with very business-facing topics. And so data in itself is quite a wide function and topic and capability. And then I think in addition to data, right, you kind of have to have that business orientation, because typically with the job, what you need to do is interface with the business to understand their needs and translate that to, the capabilities and the strategy, the data strategy that you're going to put in place and execute on. So if you can't do that very well, that's not a great place to be in, right? So there's kind of two extremes. You can be very, very technical and focus on the engineering, and that's a great place to be. Or you could be very close to the business side of things and the strategy and the kind of the operating side of things. And I think there has to be a sweet spot, right, for data, because you kind of need to tap into both worlds from time to time.
Sure.
And I've worked with a lot of different types of data professionals, and there's no sort of one person alike. There's always like a unique journey and unique story. But my advice would be, try to build that broad profile.
Sure.
You have to be passionate about the engineering side. You have to be passionate about the analytics. You have to be passionate about visualization, data science, and also the business strategy. Like all of these things kind of have to come together. And if that's not the case, then that's fine, right? You could have a very successful career just on the engineering side. But if you're passionate about the broader spectrum, then I think that can take you on that more kind of CDO journey.
Do you feel like coming from a heavy math and computer engineering background, that the working in consultancy served as a forcing function to make you think about the business impact first? And not just building things for the sake of building them, but actually we need a business case, we need an ROI, we need to work backwards from the customer. Otherwise, this thing is just not going to see the light of day.
So I mean, you could get very very much addicted to building stuff without actually having, of course, like an outcome or impact. So it's very important to always go back to the vision, the strategy, what you're trying to achieve. I think, to answer your question, consulting is a great discipline, right? And I recommend to a lot of people to, just give it a go, right? And see if there's something that you enjoy. Maybe you do it for a few years, maybe you do it for longer, right? Who knows? But the things that consultancy can teach you are things like storytelling, communication, structure, frameworking, relating to clients, understanding their needs. Those are very valuable skills in any context, whether it's data or not. So definitely, I think that part of my journey has helped me quite a lot throughout the years.
Excellent. So let's tie that into what you're doing now at Holland and Barrett. What were the lessons that you learned from all of that experience that you've had that you applied in Holland and Barrett, especially starting with where was it when you started and where are we now? And if you could take us through that journey and the learnings, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did the story start? So again, I joined 3 years ago. The digital transformation journey for HMB started a little bit earlier. And just, in terms of context, HMB is a very well-known UK staple brand, right?
Yeah.
Been around for 150 years. We have more than 1,000 stores in the UK and in total 1,300 plus stores across Europe. So it's a pretty large-scale organization. But it's also comes from a place where it's quite traditional. So the digital transformation journey that we're on aims to modernize our business. And that looks at things like data, obviously, technology, product, customer centricity, omni-channel, bringing that retail experience across both offline and online channels, international expansion, and so on, and additional services beyond the traditional kind of retail. So all of that is very ambitious, and it's a very energizing mission to kind of be part of, because our mission is to make wellness a way of life for everyone. And so I think when I came in 3 years ago, that was a couple of years into the journey. I think it was a time where we kind of needed to, we'd spent a bit of time building the foundations of our data capabilities, but I would say probably they were not very consistent and clear, and perhaps not very future-proof. So the journey started by defining, what is that data strategy? What does data mean for HMB? What do we want to achieve with data? It's all good to say we need data, but what does that actually mean? And then splitting that into different capabilities, hiring the teams behind those, reorganizing where we had to reorganize, establishing some new tech where, for example, we didn't have a data warehouse, right? So that's quite an important aspect to have as part of a data platform. So we added that into the strategy and we executed on that, and we have a great data warehousing team today. And so really our journey is about, we call it data is the beating heart of the business, right? Yeah. We kind of have to make decisions through data on a daily basis. That's the beating heart, the rhythm of the business. And we started from a fairly, I would say, humble starting point, but I'm very proud and happy with where we are today. And big shout out to the team that has made it possible as well. And it's been really exciting.
So to get a bit tangible here about, how to get this done, where did you start? Did you start like, okay, we need a data strategy, let's go top down?
Yeah.
Did you go more like bottom up, like, okay, there are some foundations we need to build, let's build the foundations first and then use that scaffolding to let the team run with the requirements? Or is it more of a consulting approach where we do an analysis or an assessment of here's where we are now, and we give a score for each kind of element of a data platform and where we need to be, and then the steps we need to achieve each of them? What kind, or neither of these three options, what approach did you take?
That's a really good question. So, in any C role, right, and in my kind of CDO role as I came in, you kind of have a limited time window to have that early impact.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of expectations, obviously. So I think it's very important. It's quite critical how you spend your time in the first, couple of months. And usually, in my experience, as you join a business, typically there's like three kind of approaches, right? You're either there to build something from scratch. Yeah. If it's, a business without a data platform or without any kind of data capability, team. Yeah. Or you're there to kind of pivot or transform what was already there. Yeah. Or you're coming in to kind of enhance and build on what's already there. And so for us, it was the second, right? So there was capabilities in place, but we had to tweak them, right? We had to pivot certain things, we had to stop doing certain things, and we had to start doing other things. So the first few weeks was really about making that clear by understanding the existing stack, the existing capabilities, auditing, so to say, what was in place, and then working with the team to create that vision of the new platform and the new strategy will look like.
Okay, so it's more about really finding out where are we now and what's the delta between now and where we want to be, right? But how did you define where do we want to be?
Sure.
Because sometimes the different parts of the business have an idea of where they want to be from a business outcome perspective in terms of use cases, revenue, bottom line, whatever it is. From the technical perspective, where we want to be means using modern tools, using modern tech, maybe automating processes. Yeah. You are the bridge that brings that all together to crystallize the definition of where do we want to be. How did you go about that?
It's a really good question again. I mean, so with data, it's not something that you can extract benefit from overnight, right? It's a journey. Yeah. And that's quite important to explain to the business and to the leadership and to tell that story. And so you have to be very mindful about what the ultimate business goal is and the value that you're trying to create. But you also have to take certain investments in the short term that are more technical in nature, that you know that you're going to have to do one way or the other, right, regardless of the use cases. And that's just an investment that you need to do. And usually my approach would be to communicate to the management team that the first 3 to 6 months, it's going to be a lot of investment, right? You're not going to see a lot of visible output because that will come later, right? So it's about laying that foundation. And especially if you're turning around existing capabilities or you're starting from scratch, obviously. But you kind of have to time box that, right? That needs to be a 3 to 6 month exercise. If it starts to take a bit longer, your credibility will have an impact, your reputation, people will start to get impatient. They will want to start to see some results. Yeah. And so, what we did was expectation setting. So we said, okay, we're going to take 6 months to build the new platform. So that involved enhancing the existing data lake and also building a data warehouse because we didn't have one. When we used Redshift for that from AWS. And in that period, a lot of it was learning about the business, establishing the relationships, but also building that foundation, building that platform. And then focusing on a couple of quick wins because you do have to show a few quick wins, even though the platform may not be fully ready, just to keep the momentum and to keep the excitement going. So in that first, 6 month period, it was all about expectation management, articulating the vision, getting the buy-in from leadership, and then, executing really well on that. Execution is extremely important as well.
I think you mentioned something very important, which is time boxing. Yeah. And I think this is one of the unsung struggles of any industry really, but in ours specifically. Me personally, I've worked with many organizations and who have been trying to build out, a new data strategy, data platform, whatever. And I could tell you that they've almost never met their timelines, right? And for good reasons. Yeah. You said 3 to 6 months, which is quite ambitious. Yeah. I've seen some organizations take 6 to 12 months just to evaluate technology, just to define where do we want to go, just to align stakeholders, just to set up MVPs and POCs. Yeah. So just the decision, defining what we want and the decision-making process could take 12 to 18 months. Yeah. How were you able to time box all of this and balance the short term with the long term in 3 to 6 months? And how could other people do the same? Yeah, again, good question. And you're right. Like I've spoken to folks who, 2 or 3 years later, they're still building the platform, right? Yeah. And that is not an unusual scenario, and it can be very challenging. I think in our case, so what helped was that I'd done that a few times, right? And by the time I joined HMB, I probably deployed 5 or 6 data platforms in different contexts, large scale, small scale, startups to kind of global enterprise. And so you kind of, when you've done that a few times, you develop a playbook. And every time you refine that playbook, you make it a little bit better. You learn a little bit more about, the mistakes that you've made and what to do and what not to do. And so, essentially building on that experience, it was the decision-making, I think, was relatively quick, right? So within a few weeks,
we kind of knew what the stack should look like. And again, I don't want to discredit what was already there, right? We already had a data lake and we had a lot of data in place. So we didn't start from zero.
Yep.
We had something in place. But what you're saying is interesting, because when I came in, actually a lot of the last year prior to that was spent doing proof of concepts and experimenting with different options and evaluating different options. And I think when you have too many choices, you kind of get to this decision paralysis.
Paradox of choice.
Paradox of choice. Yeah, it's too many choices. They all do things similarly but differently. Which one is better? And there's pricing, and then there's like features, and you start comparing all the features, and they're all tools in the end of the day, right? You could probably make it work with any of them. So my kind of perspective on this is that learn one of those tools well, really, really well, and just build that expertise and keep learning and building on top of it. So in our case, I've worked with Redshift since 2014, and I think Redshift came out in 2013 or something, right? So it wasn't that, it was pretty early on in the journey, and Redshift has been part of my career and professional journey since then, and it's been an essential part of whatever progress and success I've seen. So I have to also be thankful to the great tech that AWS has built. And again, there's alternatives, and you can make it work with others, but that's what works for us. And I think that's very quickly we made the decision, and then we just started executing the playbook and also bringing the team. You kind of have to hire a few strategic roles that perhaps from your network that that you can bring from your past experience, and then start to grow that knowledge in the playbook across the whole team. And over time, you manage to do that.
How did you break the team out of analysis paralysis and get them to, let's make a decision. Maybe it's imperfect, but we need to make a decision. At the end of the day, there are tools, like you're saying.
Yeah, by being very unpopular, I think.
Okay.
So usually, I think...
Hey, that's a good point, actually. If we're trying to please everybody, you're going to please nobody, right?
Yeah, you tend to make people a little bit upset at the start, right? Because they're kind of used to what's there.
Yeah.
No one likes change. They like the tech that they have, and they've invested emotionally into it, right? If somebody were to come in tomorrow and says, we're going to get rid of what you've got and start something new, I'd be very upset as well. And that's happened a few times, right? And you kind of have to, I guess you need to balance the empathy, but also really focus on what's right for the business. Yeah. And you might lose a few people along the way, and that's unfortunate. That's their decision. But in the end of the day, you got to do what's right for the business and also what you believe is right for the team longer term. Yeah. And so, I think with a new role, with a new C-level role, there's always that initial period where you can afford to be disruptive, right? There's an expectation that things will change. Yeah. So you can do that. You can't do that every 6 months, right? Because then you will burn out the team and it will destabilize the whole operation. But you have that 2-3 month window, initial time window, where you can assess, audit, articulate what you think is working, what isn't working, and what has to change. And then you work with the team to bring them on board with your vision. And that bringing on board is also very, very important. They have to be bought into it. And so that's kind of what we did. Okay. Yeah.
So if I were to distill some of the learnings that you mentioned here, you come in because you're new. You know that the people are going to expect some disruption. Yeah. So you lean into that into the initial period to make as many changes as possible, risking some unpopularity, but probably it's the best time for it. Yeah. At the same time, we time box certain activities so that we give the business just enough to give us leeway to do the long-term investments that we need to make while giving them some quick wins. And at the same time, hiring some of the strategic roles from your network or growing them from within if the talent is available. And then use all of these elements to build out the foundations that you need to make the most progress to cover that delta that we mentioned earlier. And then we're now into business as usual and execution. Does that summarize it well?
Fantastic summary, yes.
Okay, great.
Except you don't end up to business as usual, because that never comes.
There's no such thing, right?
It's just phase one, what I would call phase one.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I think we all have this idea in our minds sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but at least from personal experience, there is this collective idea that there is a cruising altitude stage that we'll reach, which could be true for some elements, but it's never really true for everything, is it?
Yeah.
So I think thinking about it as in a phased approach is more useful as a mental model than business as usual, like you were saying.
Yeah. I mean, the way we think about it is, so we think of our data strategy as a roughly 5-year journey.
Yeah.
So we're kind of 3 years in now.
Okay.
And phase one is that building phase, right? So it's about getting the platform in place, hiring the team, structuring the team, putting a robust organization in place. And so that's the initial investment. And that phase is actually really exciting, right? Because you get to build stuff and you get to build the team and you're kind of like coding with them and, you know, it's exciting. It's also tiring, but it's exciting. Yeah. And then what I would call phase two is then when you kind of start scaling that. So you take that foundation and you start getting value out of it. So you're growing usage, you're growing adoption, you're spreading the analytics in the business. So you get more and more people to have access to data and insights. You demonstrate value in terms of making the right decisions. You build some tools, you build some customer-facing features and things like that, right? So you're kind of really scaling on the foundation that you had in phase one. And then phase three, which is, I think, where we are now, is you have the foundation, you have the scale. Now it's really about extracting the value out of it. So it's translating data into P&L impact, into initiatives, into tangible results, part of business initiatives. And that's also very exciting. And it's probably equally difficult as the earlier phases. You're no longer like building from scratch.
Yeah.
So, maybe the phase one is more entrepreneurial in some sense, but you're focused on sustaining and making sure that the platform accommodates the growth of the business and continuously delivering return on that investment. And, you generally don't have a lot of ROI conversations in year one, but you have a lot of them later on, right? Because the scrutiny increases and the expectation levels of the returns on the investments that you've put into the team and the data also increase. Yeah. And that's kind of where we are now.
So 3 phases. Phase 1, foundation building. Phase 2, scaling. Phase 3, translating into business outcomes.
Yeah.
Right. How did that map to the 3-year or the 5-year journey? Like from a timeline perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, understand it on an abstract level what the phases are, but on the ground, how did that translate from
I would roughly map it to, year 1 is phase 1, year 2 is phase 2, and maybe year and a half. And then the last 3 years of the journey is phase 3.
Okay. How do you make sure that you're able to meet timelines like that if there is a big gap somewhere in the initial audit that you've done? The gap doesn't necessarily have to be technology. Yeah. It could be technical debt. Yeah. It could be software engineering practices. Yeah. It can definitely be talent, either availability of talent or skills of talent or distribution of talent. Like you don't have them in your org, for example. They could be spread out across different orgs or different departments within the same org. So how do you manage that kind of situation?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head, right? So if you look at what makes a data strategy successful, right? You have the tech, you have the people, you have the ways of working, and I would add to that the culture of the company. And so we kind of look at all those 4, and I would say for the tech we're okay. It's never going to be perfect, but it's a pretty strong stack, and we're happy with it, and we're scaling it. People-wise, you mentioned concentration of talent, right? So we try to find the talent wherever they are, right? So if I have team members in my team that are in Indonesia and Argentina, right? So we're covering almost definitely more than half of the globe.
Sure. Okay.
And we have people all over, right? And these are folks that, we've just found, in some cases we knew them from before, but in some cases we just, looked for the best people, and that's where we found them. Yeah. So our mindset is, find the best talent no matter where they are. And these days it's easier with remote working. It's a lot easier to get that done. And then you've got kind of ways of working. So we're a very product-centric organization in terms of the whole technology function and also increasingly more the rest of the business. And so it's about, being agile, being experiment-driven, data-driven, not having huge waterfall plans and sprint-based, quick feedback loops, customer insights, and that sort of thing. So, best-in-class engineering practices, really. We apply that. And then culture, I think, is interesting. And that's probably the most challenging one, I would say, still, because culture takes time.
And you can't see it, right? You can't measure it.
You can kind of
feel it.
Yeah, you can feel it. And how do you define it even, right? It's not easy to define culture, but you can kind of feel it in the efficiency of the business, in terms of behaviors, in terms of perhaps, some outcomes that are not ideal but shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
And that takes time, and that's more than data, that's almost touches on a broad people culture aspect. And I think for somebody in my role, kind of my responsibility is to champion data and to help evangelize to the business how we should operate and how we should behave and how we should use data on a day-to-day basis, almost like beyond the tech, but on a cultural level. And that's a journey, right? That takes time and we're still working on it. And I'm sure we will stumble a few times before we get it right, but we're definitely moving in the right direction.
So I think culture is an important aspect.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not well understood or well defined, but we all know that it's there. It has a part to play. So I want to understand how you managed the culture. First of all, how did you change the perceptions of stakeholders in the sense that data is not a function, but it is something that needs to be part of a culture? We need to become a data-driven culture on one hand.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, given that remote work has made work easier, some would argue that it also makes culture harder to scale.
Yeah.
So how do you manage or scale the culture to get people feeling the same resonance frequency, so to speak, in Indonesia and Argentina as the people here in the UK?
I'll start with the second question.
Okay.
So it's very correct observation, and that's something I also really miss, right? Mm-hmm. So some of my best experiences professionally was when we had a small capable team in one place, kind of having that entrepreneurial family feeling, and you're working on difficult problems and you're kind of winning or failing together, right? That's a really special feeling to have, and it's an amazing thing when you get that right. And so sometimes I miss that because it's, as you said, when you're working remotely, it's quite difficult to replicate that.
Yeah,
you don't have those intangible, informal life interactions. You kind of become a face on the screen. And unfortunately, that's the reality, right? I don't think that will change. So we kind of have to bring the best of both worlds. So I think there's certain benefits of remote working, obviously. But like with everything in life, you need a balance.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is bring the team together, periodically. So we do like twice a year events. We bring them into the UK. We interact a lot as a team. We do, there's a lot of different informal interactions as part of the daily, weekly cycle. Yeah. And we kind of try to keep that spirit alive, but it's not the same thing, and probably will never be the same thing. But we kind of have to try our best to sustain that cultural element.
So from what I'm hearing here is the key is intentionality. Like we have to kind of design our year to take into account intentional interactions between us and our team members. So throughout the day-to-day or the week-to-week, we'll have small interactions with the different team members, and then bring them all together at different parts of the year as much as we can, and facilitate that kind of warmth and relationship building as much as we can. Not exactly the same as being in person, but at least it gives them the chance to feel like they're part of something larger instead of just an arm's length away from the rest of the team behind a screen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And especially in a larger company, it's relatively common to feel a bit alone, right? Because you're one part of a very large machine. So I try to I think we have microcultures at different levels. So I have 6 teams in my area. Data engineering, warehousing, BI, digital analytics, product analytics, and data science, right? So each of those have their own microculture. So you can kind of build your identity around that. But then we have the data team. So you can build your identity around being part of a data team. Then you have tech, right, which is the wider product engineering, data security organization. And then you have all of HMB, including the business functions, etc. And you kind of have to build your identity at all of those levels. And I think the leaders of those different areas have a responsibility to encourage a positive culture and a sense of belonging to that level.
And how do you manage the first part of culture, which is infusing it into the rest of the organization and making it part of the...
Yeah, that's the tough one, isn't it? Well, at the start, I think a lot of it is storytelling, right? You kind of have to explain to the broader, management and broader senior and mid-level management, what is it that we're trying to do? And for a lot of those folks, they know it because they've seen it somewhere else, or they've done it before in other organizations. And for some folks, maybe they haven't seen it, right? So for them, it's slightly a new concept. So I think you kind of have to tell that story. And so storytelling becomes quite important, especially early on. And then I think you have to simplify the tech stuff, right? Because when it comes to data, you can endlessly go into the rabbit hole and go very geeky about all the amazing stuff that you can do with data. We've kind of created a fun little metaphor at HMB, which has stuck with us. And probably, hopefully, become a bit timeless. We call it the 3 Michelin star vision. So we want to build a 3 Michelin star data strategy, data platform. And so what do we mean by that, right? So you kind of have 3 levels as part of that 3 Michelin restaurant, let's call it. You kind of have the data lake, which is the bottom layer, right? That's your raw data storage, governance, security, etc. So under the metaphor, that's where you get the food, get the ingredients, you cut them, you store them, you prepare them, they're kind of ready to go, but they're not consumable, right?
The fridge and the freezer and the boxes and the containers.
Yeah, all of that stuff, right? It's the raw storage. But it's also the prep work for the kitchen, right? So you're kind of preparing the data or the ingredients. So you chop the potatoes or whatever it may be so that they're good to go a bit later on. But again, it's not consumable. You can't really do anything with it. And then the middle layer is the data warehouse. And that's where a lot of the intelligence happens, right? That's where a lot of the processing, the transformations, the aggregations and the cleansing of the data and so on. So that's the kitchen, right? That's what we say. This is where you cook the data. You get all of those ingredients and then you put it in the data warehouse and you cook the data so it becomes consumable. It's something you can actually consume as a finished data asset or meal as such. And then the last layer on the top is the application data layer or the analytical data layer. These are different apps or analytical tools built on top of the data warehouse. And that's where the final served product is. So that's your, taking the meal from the kitchen onto the table and enjoying a nice meal. So that would be your BI platform, that would be your data science platform, that would be your low-code automation platform, your analysts running SQL, etc., etc. Right? You're building these high level of abstraction of data assets, capabilities, and tooling for them to consume as a finished product. And so, we kind of, and that's a pretty standard architecture, right? There's nothing revolutionary about this. People have been doing that for decades. But I think being able to explain that and in a way that resonates and that folks can kind of relate to is helpful, and it helps with translating the very technical, complex stuff into something that clicks and relates, and therefore helps with culture and evangelizing as well.
I think that's a good point, because part of the tension that happens between the business and data teams or any tech team really is that they don't understand why it's taking so long.
Yeah.
They may just think that the organization the tech org is slow or bureaucratic, or they're too in the weeds with their technology. Yeah. They're not really focused on the business outcome. And that's how shadow IT gets created, or needless disruption happens to a particular strategy. Yeah. So I think you're right that a lot of people, data professionals, know these three layers, but most business professionals don't. Yeah. And giving them an analogy that they can relate to, seeing like the data kitchen, as you like to call it, I think is an important analogy to set the right expectations for them, so that they understand, okay, we spent all this time just getting the food and storing it, right? We're in the process now of dicing it, preparing it, getting it ready for consumption. We're almost there. This is when we can have our first appetizer. Yeah. And those are your MVPs, your quick wins, etc. Or snack, exactly. Yeah.
Because you need those. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at least some bread and some olive oil. Yeah. And I guess that goes back to what you were saying earlier about the expectation management, right? Yeah. It's a key part of it, I think.
Yeah. So, and then the real gourmet stuff comes later. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And then once you have a fully fledged kitchen, you can just pump out lots of different gourmet dishes, right? Yeah. And you can be faster about it, and the quality gets higher. Yeah. The unfortunate or fortunate reality is that it's kind of exponential, right? The best results come at the end, but then when it rains, it pours, as they say. Yeah. Now, going back to building all of this out, and we touched on it a little bit before, but I want to dive a little bit deeper on it, which is talent management, right? How do you manage talent when you move it? I mean, you said you did this 5 or 6 times before. Yeah. So you're always going to be in a situation where you have some talent, but either not enough in terms of quantity, or there's a gap in skills, or they're not in your org, or you need to hire new people. You're never going to have that perfect setup as soon as you arrive. Yeah. Sometimes that could be the biggest challenge, actually. Yeah. How do you manage that? And how do you think about talent management in general?
Yeah, so it's a hard one. And I think, I was very fortunate, because when I came in, my team was relatively decent size, right? We were probably 20 or 25 people. We're now 60 plus people, right? So we've grown 3 times over. But we had a foundation to build on. And I think, my style, and I think for most folks out there who kind of used to work in a fast-paced tech environment, right? You have to hire the best, right? So I would rather wait and not hire a B player to find that A player, and suffer the short-term pain than rush decision, get somebody who's perhaps not the perfect fit, and then have to regret that later on. Because as we all know, B players hire more B players, or C players. A players tend to attract A players, right? So you want to get the best out of the best, and then really invest in them. Spend a lot of one-on-one time with them, coach them, support them, and over time, give them a lot of empowerment to lead, their area of the strategy. And that's the model that I've tried to build. When you start, you tend to be a little bit more prescriptive, because you kind of have to push a little bit the ship, so to say, in the right direction. And once the ship sails in the right direction, you kind of step back and you empower more. So it's also a little bit of a journey in terms of how you approach it. But I think it inevitably always goes back to hire the best. Hire the best people, empower them, and enable them to get the best out of their potential, and to get the job done.
So based on all of this, what have been some of the business outcomes that you've achieved in H&B so far in the journey?
So we work across the whole business, right? It's challenging, but also really rewarding. And sometimes I have to pinch myself when I think about like all the different areas that we've touched on with relatively, it's not a very large team, right? So, it starts within our own area, within tech, right? So we have a very capable product analytics team. So we've transformed the way we do product development and product management. So it's a lot more data-driven now, experimentation-driven, analytics-driven, feature roadmaps grounded in insights and in analysis.
When you mean feature roadmaps, you mean feature roadmaps in the tech team or the Holland and Barrett's
I'm talking about the product specific, the tech team specifically now, right? Okay. So we're closer to home now.
Yeah.
So we've helped that part of our business. Then we have the digital area, right? So that includes everything from digital trading to marketing, performance marketing, and marketing automation, CRM, et cetera. All of that stuff is really, really important, especially given the size of marketing budgets.
Yeah.
But also because it relies heavily on data, right? So automating customer journeys, personalizing the content, sending the communication at the right time to the right person with the right content.
Yeah.
All of that, and we're not there yet. We're still working on getting there, but we've made a massive progress to enable the digital organization with data. And then remember, we're a retailer, right? So we have a supply chain and we have stores.
Yeah.
And so a supply chain is a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
So we use data we have our in-house forecasting algorithms, our in-house replenishment systems. We use data science models to optimize and forecast where do we need to send individual units of stock at the store SKU level. So literally, take this unit from the warehouse, send it to this store on this day, and that runs continuously, right? So the replenishment capability. And 3 years ago, I think we were struggling with that, and now I think we're in a much healthier place when it comes to stock availability, which is one of the most important metrics for any retailer.
Yeah.
And so I'm proud and happy with the progress that the broader team has done, and data is part of that journey as well.
Yeah.
And then with retail, it's about understanding your retail performance, analytics, and also some customer-facing features in stores. For example, we have our in-house till system.
Yeah.
In Holland and Barrett stores, which is, if you haven't seen it, it's amazing. Try it out. Completely built in-house by a small team, but really, really great experience. And we have a lot of enablement in stores with our colleagues using technology to bring the best customer experience to our customers. And so, these are some of the examples. We work with our contact center as well to give them the insights that will make them deliver the best customer experience. So we're pretty much touching on every part of the retail organization.
So these are very high leverage use cases. We're talking about customer journey automation. We're talking about customer personalization, supply chain automation, and basically analytics. Creating analytics, of course, retail analytics and performance analytics, forecasting, and creating new tills from scratch. Now, it sounds to me like most of these, the foundation and the core of them are analytics.
Yeah.
What's your unfiltered opinion on the business impact of Gen AI? Is it overhyped, or do you think that there's going to be a step change in the kind of business impact it can have on an organizational scale?
Yeah. Gen AI, I love Gen AI, right? The technology is extremely, it's magic.
Yeah.
I think it's really inspirational, and the key thing is to find a good fit between a business case or use case and what you can do with that tech. And I think where we are today is that that fit is not always there, right? So sometimes Gen AI is used as a catalyst to build something or to try an idea, but it's not always clear, first of all, is it the right idea? And second of all, is Gen AI actually the tech that you need to solve that idea? So I think we're in that territory where there's really, really exciting technology. that can add a lot of value, but maybe it's not broadly understood well enough by enterprises.
Yeah.
When it comes to us, we kind of defined, again, 3 phases. There's something about 3 phases, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And so, you can start with personal productivity.
Okay.
So you can use the tech to empower, enable higher rates of productivity for you individually as a colleague in the organization. And then you move to in-house or internal automation, and ultimately customer-facing features, which would be the third phase. And that's third because it's more difficult, it's at scale, it's customer-facing, so there's more considerations there. And so I think we are early on in that journey. So I wouldn't say, there's probably not many companies that would say we're mature on Gen AI.
Yeah.
It was relatively early on, but what we're doing is we've built a lot of phase 1 type solutions. So giving colleagues tools to automate parts of their day job or to help them make decisions faster. So for example, we have an in-house Copilot tool that allows you to, we have a library of prompts. So you can, click on a category, let's say, product catalog, right? So you click on that category and you have a collection of prompts, you pick one, and let's say it allows you to copy paste a list of SKUs, and then you can easily categorize them or segment them into whatever segmentation makes sense for you. And all of that is user-friendly and accessible. Or another example would be like, again, these are simple things, but like summarizing documents, summarizing meetings, summarizing, summarizing interactions, etc. A lot of that exists in off-the-shelf products, but we've kind of customized it for our use case. Image generation, right? Creating media for presentations, for product brainstorming, for product innovation. That has been quite popular as well. And so, we're kind of building on tech that's out there, but packaging it in a way that's useful to our colleagues. And a lot of times that's the gap, right? Because the tech is ready, but how do you build a great product experience around it? That's the tough part. We've also done a lot of work on automation in-house. We have some knowledge discovery tools. For example, we have a kind of like a chatbot where you can go in and say, where can I find this data, right? And we've indexed and vectorized all of our dashboards and analytical assets.
Excellent.
And fully automated, like no human, curation needed, right? Just goes through the dashboards, the metadata, and creates, very nice human readable descriptions. You can then have a chatbot experience to, if you're a new joiner or if you're overwhelmed by the hundreds of dashboards that we have, you can simply ask, where can I find, availability for, in our Netherlands market for the digital channel, and it will tell you where to go and find that. And so, we're doing things like that. And then we're building a roadmap to really scale more in the customer-facing features as well. But as I said earlier, I think what's important is really to make sure you have a very clear connection between what the tech can do and what you're trying to achieve. Because 2 things can happen. Either what you're trying to achieve doesn't have a business case, or you can solve it with traditional tech that doesn't necessarily have to be Gen AI.
Okay.
So
if I were to play that back to you, Gen AI is magic, but this magic doesn't work everywhere or for everything. It works on very specific things very well, and other things it doesn't have much of an impact.
Or it's not the right tool. It can work, but probably not cost efficient or cost effective way to do it.
Could be not feasible. The cost of magic is too high. Right? However, where it does have a place in any organization is probably a 3-layered approach, like everything else. So starting with employee personal productivity, and then moving to internal automation within the organization itself, and then automating workflows that are customer facing. So it really comes down to the same value that tech has always provided, which is automating manual processes at scale. This is the next step of that, which perhaps could be faster, but at the end of the day, it is the same value prop, just maybe on steroids this time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a great summary again. Very GPT,
very GPT summary.
A great summary. I love it. But in the end of the day, it's a tool, right? Again, technology on its own is just a tool. Like what you need to figure out is how do you use that tech to make your business successful. And I think the hype that we have currently with Gen AI, in many ways is very helpful, because I think the technology has amazing transformational potential, right? And the world will change and will continue to change it. But it's also hype, right? We have to realize that it's not always what you need for a specific use case that you may think you need it for. So you kind of have to understand it, right? You have to understand what it is, how it works, what it can do, what it cannot do, and when it's the right tool for use for the job.
Yeah. Right tool for the right job, basically, is the takeaway here.
Yeah.
Speaking of takeaways, I mean, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
In 1 minute, how would you describe your current and updated CDO playbook?
1 minute GPT summary of it.
Yes, exactly.
I think the playbook, we've talked a lot about it, right? It hasn't really changed. Like you, as you join an enterprise, you quickly need to figure out where you can add value. You put together the right strategy and vision. You build a capable team and energize them around that vision. And then you work very closely with your business partners and stakeholders to understand their need, build the foundation, and then bring that foundation to solve to address that need. If you do that well, and that sounds simpler than what it is in practice, I think it can work magically. But it's basically that playbook that you kind of have to keep repeating. And every time there's slightly different nuances, right? Sure. Every organization is different, culture is different, challenges are different. Yeah. Retail is very different to what I used to do before, which is marketplaces. Yeah. And so, as long as you're learning, having fun, and enjoy the challenges, you're in a good place. Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense. Basically, it starts with you as the captain of the ship example, to distill the 5 things that you just mentioned. First, we define where we want to go. And then we need to find the crew, and we need to start building a ship, the foundations. Yeah. We also need benefactors to give us the investments that we need to build the ship and to basically ship their products over to the destination that we need to go, and keep getting their support for the journey, that we're still in the shipbuilding phase. We're not going to ship anything yet. Yeah. But once we do, we are going to get the results. And once you're on the high seas, and once the sails are open, you can let the rest of the team, the crew who is now experienced, just be empowered and basically do what they do best, while you steer and direct from time to time until finally you can reach that destination. The only thing being that there's no really destination. That's just the end of phase 1. Then there's going to be a new 5-year destination. And, exactly. And I think it's a good metaphor. And what I would say is, I mean, we often like to say at HMB we're building a plane while we're flying it. Okay. And that, like, honestly, it feels like that most of the time, right? Yeah. And so, in your metaphor, right, we're not waiting for the ship to be built before we sail. We kind of start sailing it right away. Okay. We're kind of plugging the holes while the water is leaking and whatnot. You've jumped in with a rowboat on a ship that's already on the way. And you have to kind of optimize this ship now. Yeah, it's barely afloat, but it's working. We're moving in the right direction, and then little by little we're modernizing it and making it more robust and so on. But you have to move. You can't wait 3 years to get moving. Right. You have to move from the very start. That's very important, in my opinion. Well, thank you for refining the analogy. My last question would be, when are you going to publish the playbook? Maybe an opportunity, right? I haven't thought about it, but I hope that I hope my story has resonated in some way. I think everyone's professional journey is very unique, and in many ways, I've done a lot of mistakes over the years, and I've been very fortunate to be at the right time in the right place with the right people. I hope some of this resonates and relates to people's experience, and hopefully served as a little bit of inspiration for how they can look at building a sustainable data team and data strategy. Definitely has. I've personally learned a lot, and I think anybody watching this will too. And until the playbook is released, they'll have to make do with some of the great lessons that you've shared today.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ismail. Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, cheers.